When you think about some of the most influential and, yeah, fiery evangelists of the 20th century, one name really stands out. He was a man who called a nation back to God. Today, we're going to dive into the life and message of John R. Rice. Let's just start with this one quote, because it gets right to the absolute heart of his ministry. For John R. Rice, this wasn't just some abstract idea. It was the engine that drove every single thing he said and did. And look, this wasn't just a clever line he came up with. This was the core conviction that fueled a lifetime of preaching. So who was the man behind these powerful words? To really get the message, you've got to understand the man, right? So let's start with his fiery call to ministry. So who was this guy? Well, Rice was a preacher, an evangelist, and a really key leader in the independent Baptist movement. But his influence absolutely exploded in 1940 when he founded the Sword of the Lord. You got to understand, this revival paper basically became his national pulpit, spreading his sermons to stir up churches and call believers back to what he saw as their one primary duty: personal soul winning. And that idea right there, soul winning, that was the absolute central theme of his entire ministry, which of course brings us to the soul winner's mandate. Okay, so what did he actually mean by soul winning? For Rice, this wasn't some special gift reserved for a select few. No, he saw it as the basic, the normal, expected activity of any Christian who is truly filled with the Spirit. And he did not pull any punches, framing it in the starkest terms you can imagine. In his mind, if you weren't winning souls, you were being disobedient, period. There was just no middle ground. And this call to action, it was for everybody. This wasn't just for the pastors or the missionaries. Rice taught that if you were a believer sitting in the pews, this was your job, your personal responsibility. All right, so we know what he believed, but what about how he delivered that message? His style was, well, it was unforgettable, and it's summed up perfectly in this next section: preaching with tears. His sermons really had three distinct qualities. First up, they were plain. He used simple, direct language that anyone could get, no complicated theology. Next, his message was always pointed. He spoke directly to people's hearts and challenged them without any hesitation. And finally, his preaching was just saturated with Scripture. For him, the ultimate authority for his message always came directly from the Bible. So, plain, pointed, and Bible-based sounds pretty intense, doesn't it? And it was. But all that fire was balanced by this really unexpected emotional depth that made his preaching so unique. So what was that unique element? Well, here's the thing. On more than one occasion, Rice would just weep openly in the pulpit. This wasn't about anger or condemnation. It was about a profound, heartbreaking compassion for the very people he was pleading with to come to Christ. So what can we learn from his life and ministry today? Let's try to distill it all down in our final section: Rice's endearing lessons. His ministry really offers three timeless principles. He urged believers not to drift from the main thing. Individual gospel witnesses save souls, not programs or buildings. He taught them to stay tender, knowing a cold heart can never move another. And finally, he challenged them to be bold. And he made this direct connection between fear and a lack of spiritual fullness. For him, a spirit-filled Christian would be a bold Christian, completely unashamed and unafraid to share their faith. There's this one story that I think sums up his entire message perfectly. Towards the end of his life, Rice was asked this very question: what is the greatest need in the church? His answer wasn't more programs, or bigger buildings, or better music. It was just one word: tears. A deep, heartfelt, weeping compassion for the lost. That, he believed, was the greatest need. And it kind of leaves us with a provocative thought for today, doesn't it? In a world that's so full of strategies and metrics, maybe his simple, profound answer, tears, is still our greatest need too.